I would like to thank our sponsor of today's episode, Miller Cooper. Founded in 1919, Miller Cooper is the 11th largest accounting and consulting firm in the Chicago area. They have 335 professional staff serving middle market businesses and their owners. On a personal note, I've had the opportunity to do several transactions with the folks at Miller Cooper, and in particular, Tad Render, who leads the firm's transaction advisory services group. And they are top-notch. In every transaction, they really pull their weight in more than one way, and our clients couldn't have been more satisfied with the work that they did. So I appreciate them sponsoring this episode, and if you have the need at any time for M&A accounting and advisory services, I really highly recommend the folks at Miller Cooper. Hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Domenic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
During this pandemic, we're all looking for opportunities and ways to mitigate the impacts of this global crisis. One such opportunity right now exists in the estate and tax planning area, given the combination of low interest rates and depressed asset valuations. This is probably a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we have an expert with us today, Eric Kalnins, to explain some of the possibilities. Eric is a partner with the law firm of Handler Thayer and specializes in the areas of business structuring, tax, both domestic and international, estate planning, and litigation. Eric is also heavily involved in the firm's planning group that creates and implements advanced estate planning techniques for high net worth clients, including the formation and operation of family offices. Eric, thank you so much for joining me today, and so happy to be talking about opportunities during this challenging time. Welcome.
Thank you, Domenic. It's great to be with you, and what a great intro. And I think you hit it right on the head with regards to now is the time to transfer wealth and plan for asset protection. So thanks for the nice introduction.
Well, I'm excited to dive into this. But before we do that, if you could give the M&A Unplugged audience a quick backgrounder on yourself and a little bit about the firm so they understand where you're coming from.
Sure. I'm a partner at Handler Thayer, LLP in Chicago. I've been a partner since 2009, been with the firm since 2004. And we're a boutique firm in downtown Chicago, a little fewer than 20 attorneys. And we've been basically working in this space since the early 90s, basically at the forefront of family office type structures, which obviously entails a lot of the issues that we're talking about today, whether it's just core estate planning, asset protection, and more sophisticated advanced planning techniques for the high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals.
So, Eric, we're reading and I'm seeing, daily more and more about why, maybe now is a great time if you've been putting off, estate planning, or even if you have an estate plan to relook at it because there's a unique opportunity. Maybe explain to the M&A Unplugged audience why that's the case. And let's dive into, some of the strategies that people could be thinking about deploying right now.
Sure. And obviously, anytime's a good time to do core estate planning. But what I really noticed at the beginning of this pandemic, just a couple of months ago, are people calling in, realizing that they haven't taken the time to do this yet, and they need to get their core estate plans in place. And when I say core estate plan, Domenic, I mean wills, trust, powers of attorney for business, power of attorneys for healthcare, powers of attorney for property, HIPAA authorization, all of these types of things that people don't think about too often because they don't like to think about it. In the usual situation, we'll have somebody come in that finally wants to get their core estate plan taken care of. And it's the most elongated type of engagement that I think we really even have at our firm, because we talk to them about it. We get the estate planning questionnaire about it out to them. And people just don't like to think about death, even though they do say that they want to take care of their estate plan in the most efficient manner possible with regards to taxation, asset protection, and getting it down to the right people. So I think this pandemic has really opened people's eyes up as far as the opportunity to take this time when you're hunkered down, for lack of a better phrase, and trying to put your core estate plan in place, protect your assets, and get them to the correct people. And I think we're going to talk about a number of these issues today, but it's really opened my eyes to see how people have really put off this type of planning. Then they come in, it takes months to get answers out of them. Then they finally execute it. They say, oh, that's so much better than I thought. And it's, you just got to get people in the door, get planning about it. And that's really the basic model, the foundation for the rest of the items that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, there's a whole psychology behind why people just can't get their heads wrapped around this and do this work. As a matter of fact, I had a psychologist on some time ago, and we talked about this very issue. And he said, I mean, people just can't face the finality of their lives, and they have a really hard time moving to this step. His advice, interestingly enough, and it was off mic, was that if people did this much earlier in their lives, that next stage doesn't seem so, certain to them. And he thought that, if people would start earlier in life, it would be easier to just maintain it as they moved forward versus, you get to a certain point in your life and you're like, you don't want to do it because you don't want to face it.
Yeah, you want to make it part of your lifestyle, I think is the best way to look at it. We have a lot of successful clients, high net worth, ultra high net worth, and most of them have started off and made their money through closely held businesses. That's what they know. They know their business, they know their industry, and that's how they move forward. And what we try to do at Handler Thayer is actually recreate that business aspect on their personal side and turn their personal assets, their lifestyle, their family into a business. And then something usually clicks within their mind and say, yeah, this is a lot like running my business. This makes sense to me. So what we try to do in a lot of circumstances is take a snapshot of their current estate plan, if they even have one, where all the assets are. And it's usually a jumbled mess, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And put them on some sort of schematic, one page, so they can see everything's just floating around out there. And then what we try to do is say, hey, in a perfect world, here's some of the recommendations on the next schematic that we would make, where you have potentially, all the trust owning the entities, which those entity shares are held by the trust, which are part of a family limited liability company, maybe a family office above that, maybe a family foundation off to the side, GRATs, asset protection trust, all these types of things. So you can see it on one page, and then it starts to flow. And that's usually what people understand on the business side is, here's how my business flows. Why doesn't my personal life flow like that too? And that's sort of where we come in and try to provide that type of opportunity so that they keep up on their estate plan as opposed to just throwing some documents in the drawer. What I always want to stay away from on the planning side is, this idea that somehow estate planning is something you draw up on some papers and throw it in a drawer or a vault. And
Right.
that's not an estate plan. It's something that's constantly moving. It's something that you have to picture within your own mind. And it's great to have this type of structure too, because then it works much more easily with your advisors, whether it's life insurance, investment advising, all the types of things that are out there, so that people can see this snapshot and have a much better idea of where that person's going and how they want to get to their goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So as I started off in the interview, I talked about, during this global crisis, there's so much bad news and there's, so many clients and businesses out there that are hurting. It's kind of nice to see that there's a real opportunity in front of people. And this is one area where there's really opportunity for folks to really protect wealth and protect the next generation. So why don't we dive into that and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I think the best place to look and start here, Dominic, is I started practicing law in 1999. And back in 1999, the federal estate tax exemption was $675,000. That's not a whole lot. Basically, if you had a reasonably nice house, you're potentially within the federal estate tax amount and paying federal estate tax. What it's grown up to since then, it's grown up to 1 million in the 2000s, then about 3.5 million. Then around 2010, it went down to zero for that 1 year, which is a really interesting time period. But then it did something that not many estate planning practitioners expected. It jumped up to $5 million. And Trump's tax plan, the TCJA, in 2018 jumped up to $5.45 million from 5.45 million, excuse me, to $11.2 million per spouse. Now, at today's date in 2020, each spouse can pass away with $11.58 million per spouse. So if you use the benefit of each spouse, you're talking $23 million before you even have to worry about federal estate tax. So that's just sort of a synopsis of how things have changed in the past 20 years. So when we say that this is a real opportunity, we're not just saying that it's saying that to get business. It's changed drastically over the years. And the really interesting thing is, pursuant to the Trump tax initiative from 2018, there's a sunset on that. 2025, the end of 2025, these potentially all go away. What does it go back to? Does it go back to $1 million? Does it stay at $11 million per spouse? That's why we're looking to really get people out there to take this opportunity to actually get their estate planning taken care of, because otherwise you're throwing away millions upon millions of dollars in potential estate planning credits on the estate tax exemption side that we may never get back. So we have about 5 years now, and when this first started off, it seemed like that end of 2025 was so far away, but it's right around the corner now. And we're trying to use some of these advanced planning techniques as well as basic planning techniques to let people know that it's time to start transferring, and you can do it not just on the estate tax side, but also the income tax planning side and asset protection side.
Yeah, that's a tremendous timeline. And I think that really illustrates for people really what this opportunity looks like right now, and how you really need to think about this long and hard and make sure that you've got your estate in order, no pun intended. But we've also got, at the same time, Eric, this situation as a result of the global crisis and the pandemic, where we've seen asset values come down, and we're in this low interest rate environment. And that also has added fuel to the fire, right, on all of this?
It has. It definitely has. I mean, take each of those points in turn here. On the market rates are very low. I mean, you saw what the stock market, what the economy was, what the unemployment rate was down to 4% just a few months ago, and how that's just been destroyed right now because of this pandemic in the United States and worldwide for that matter. So how is it going to come out? Nobody knows exactly, but the economic positives prior to this were quite strong. And depending on how quickly we come out of this is a good opportunity because market rates are low. Some of these planning techniques like GRATs, grant or retainer annuity trust, CLATs, things like that, selling to intentionally defective grantor trust for the next generation that pour into a dynasty trust for generations to go that's not subject to estate taxation at the federal level, are just real opportunities. Anytime you do this type of planning, when you're doing a sale, for example, to an intentionally defective grantor trust, it's one of those situations where you're selling assets to the next generation potentially, and you don't sell them at full price. You don't want to sell them at 100% of that fair market value. We try to put them in some sort of structure, well, it's an LLC or some other type of structure that gets discounts up to 30-35%. So instead of selling $10 million to somebody, you're down to 6.5 or $7 million is the starting price. And then you're selling that to them over a course of years. And that's one of the classic estate tax freeze techniques out there in order to get wealth to the next generation and get that appreciation that's going to occur over that time period of 5-10 years of payments, even longer, to the next generation, and getting it out of the matriarch and patriarch's estate. So when you say the market values are low, this is a really good opportunity, not only to get a discount pursuant to a valuation of that asset that you're potentially selling to the next generation, or you're gifting it to the next generation. It doesn't have to be a sale transaction. Not only are you getting this low market value right now for those assets, but you're also getting a discount on top of that. And that's
Yeah.
the real opportunity right there. And if you're setting it up as a grantor trust type of situation, whether it's a GRAT, whether it's a sale to an intentionally defective grantor trust, that owner can take the opportunity to actually pay the taxes on whatever's earned over the course of the years of this sale or this gift on those assets, and further keep that asset that's going to the next generation, not even hit by taxes, which most people would say, well, that's an extra gift. No, it's not an extra gift. It's yet another planning opportunity to get as much value out of your estate and to the next generation as possible.
Yeah. And so let's be illustrative here. If you've got a business that's worth, let's say the enterprise value is 25 million, or it was 25 million pre-pandemic. And let's say it's taken a hit here, and that same company, maybe the new valuation post-pandemic is, 18 million. So you've had an asset that's gone from 25 to 18, and now you get the discount on top of that. So you're transferring wealth at a much lower level than you would have before. And hopefully the asset's going to come back and reappreciate tax-free. Is that in essence the?
Oh, that's spot on, Dominic. That's exactly right. And going back to your interest rate comment too, I mean, interest rates have never been lower. So any of these structures that you try to set up, obviously, if you're selling to somebody, you have to sell it at a reasonable interest rate, whether it's the applicable federal rate or the 75/20 rate with dealing with grats. In January, for example, Dominic, the 75/20 rate was 2%. Now it's 0.6%, I think, in June. I
Yeah.
mean, the way
Wow.
it's gone down so much. And if you put that asset in a grat, gift it to the next generation, you zero it out so that the remainder interest is basically zero, so that you haven't even made a gift. All you have to do is have that asset that's contained in that grat appreciate more than 0.6% over the course of the term of that grat. And you're pushing significant wealth out of the matriarch and patriarchs level down to the children's level. So that's not a high rate. That's not a difficult rate to beat right now, which is yet another reason to seriously look into opportunities right now and transferring assets.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And Eric, are these only irrevocable trusts, or can they be set up as revocable? Are there options there? Do you have some flexibility in this, or are these strictly irrevocable trusts that are being set up?
You have irrevocable, you have revocable. You can just make straight up gifts to the next generation also. But for the most part, we try to make these irrevocable so that we get it out of the matriarch and patriarch's estate,
Completely. Yeah.
and give them the least amount of control, which is what the IRS looks at. And we've been doing these for years. The grats, the IJITs, it's not like these are risky types of transactions as long as you do them correctly. And we've seen a lot at our firm with regards to these transactions, just going through and making our clients very happy, making obviously the next generation very happy. And there's also some sort of asset protection component to this too that I think is often overlooked, Dominic. People look at estate planning as getting assets down to the next generation. Well, if it's in a trust and there's a trustee, that means you're not only getting wealth to the next generation and hopefully a tax efficient manner, but those loved ones that you're providing for can't necessarily grab those assets and just take them. It's not like a will where, okay, I pass away, here's the money, you get to do whatever you want. Oh, there are creditors out there that have liens against you. Oh, I guess they're going to get that money. That's another important component of the trust side, is just the asset protection of having a trustee say, you know what, I'm not going to make distributions to you right now, or I'm going to make distributions directly to payments for your benefit as opposed to giving you liquid cash, so that creditors out there, or let's say there's a drug problem with one of the beneficiaries or some type of other issue, they're just irresponsible in general, to keep those funds in a safe place and make sure they're being used for the proper purposes.
Makes perfect sense. Eric, if there's a downside to this, right? What is it? Or if there's something that people should be concerned about before they move into this direction, what would your advice be on that side?
Well, I don't see any downside to estate planning, obviously. I think the Real downside is waiting to do it too late. And those become the expensive estates and trust administrations that we get involved in where things were not taken care of. Here's an example I'll give you of somebody that, finally came and did some proper estate planning. Older gentleman in his 70s. And I remember him, he was up in Wisconsin actually. And the thing that he had going with him is that towards his older years, he liked to golf, he'd like to spend money. And unfortunately, he also liked to pretend he's an investment advisor and trade a lot of stocks. He's a day trader, lost a lot of money. But he did have this one asset that was very, very valuable as assets, stock in a closely held corporation that was doing quite well, is worth millions of dollars. Well, unfortunately, he ran through all his liquidity and everything, and actually he passed away after we tried to do some structuring for him, and we did do some structuring that was beneficial. But had he come to me much earlier, we could have taken care of this in a much better under much better circumstance. Because once he passed away, he had no liquidity. He had a lot of value in his estate, Dominic, but he didn't have the liquidity. So when the estate taxes come around, there was nothing there to pay the estate taxes with unless you sold the assets, which is the exact situation you want to avoid, because then what you're really involving yourself in is a fire sale. And
Yeah.
people know it. It's coming from an estate. They're going to low bid you. Fortunately, we were able to get a loan from a bank to pay the estate tax. After many banks saying no, we used the shares from the corporation as collateral. And within a year and a half, we paid that loan off by taking our time, selling the stock, and creating liquidity for the estate. But my point is, this is something from the beginning that we talked about at the beginning of this interview. It has to be a process that you keep track of throughout the year, not once in a while throughout your life, so that you know that the liquidity is not there, so that you can come up with some opportunities, maybe some life insurance, maybe some type of other asset, so that the beneficiaries aren't selling something that they may not want to sell in the first place.
Makes perfect sense. Eric, given what's going on right now in the world and with many businesses, there's a lot of folks out there who had a substantial amount of wealth tied up in their businesses, and they've seen those businesses, get devalued, in some cases substantially. For example, I spoke to a manufacturing firm out in California last week, and their business has dropped by 80%. I mean, and this is not a small business. I mean, in some cases, it's been pretty catastrophic. What's your advice to the folks who have had a substantial amount of their wealth in their businesses and they've seen it evaporate and they're worried about the future? So, some people who know it's going to come back, maybe this makes perfect sense, but what are you saying to the owners who, are not so certain about where the future is for them?
Well, that's a tough question because, estate planning isn't just documentation. It's not just taxes. It's not just asset protection or anything like that. You really then have to get down to the details. Like for some of our family offices, I have one client that's in that situation right now, manufacturing exactly, and very successful business, unique little niche, 500 employees. And he's running into that situation right now where he was potentially looking to sell a portion of that business just a few months ago at a good price. And now that arm of the business and everything else, it's really up in the air. He's a very impressive individual. He'll get through it. But the issue along with that planning is, do you want to just sell it after the patriarch or matriarch passes away that's running the business? And if not, who's going to run that business next? I think is really what it comes down to. That's because that's an important decision. Do I want to just get out of this business and cash out? Or do I have children or other relatives that are vested in this industry that I want to pass this industry down to? And that's really a point that people really don't look into enough, in my opinion. You'll see a lot of these, virtual family offices, single family offices get into an industry, but they'll use some of their employees and the closely held business as their advisors or their people that are helping them run the family office. That's called an embedded family office, which is what you really want to try to avoid. You want to try to create a family office that is completely separate from that. So that's helping your family side as opposed to relying on your employees. But My point is, if you don't have the right people that business is going to succeed to, and you never know when that's going to happen. Death is just right around the corner, whether it's an accident or it's some type of cancer or anything else. And that's one thing that people really aren't thinking about enough is, who are those key employees that I need to keep around so that my son or daughter can run this place? Does my son or daughter want to continue with this business? And if they do, how do we keep the liquidity? Or is that matriarch or patriarch of the business the person that everybody looks to? How are those remaining employees going to stick around and say, you know what, I really have confidence in the son of this person, or are they going to think it's a joke? It reminds me of that movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Tommy Boy, where
Oh
Tommy
yeah,
Boy
sure,
goes in there and,
sure.
the guy that graduated in 9 years, they're like, yeah, those are doctors usually. And in any event, that whole idea is really a perfect example of all of a sudden the patriarch passing away, and the business is left in peril and the whole town's left in peril. I know
Yeah.
it's a fictional movie and everything, but it's a really good little snapshot of where do you want that business to go.
Well, let me tell you, that fictional movie has a real life component to it. In fact, I did an interview some months ago with the daughters of an owner who passed away, and the owner did an incredible job of putting their personal affairs in order, but did nothing on the business side and didn't incorporate any of that planning into his estate,
Hmm.
and passed away. And by the way, it wasn't sudden. He was terminally ill and they knew it for a long time, still ignored this, and literally left the business in shambles. And it didn't need to be that way at all.
It never does. Yeah, it's really sad to see that. And, if you look at the four major causes of wealth erosion, Dominic, number one, mismanagement. Of course, that's a very broad category. Number two, lawsuits. Three, divorces. And four, of course, taxes. So you got mismanagement, lawsuits, divorces, and taxes. Three of those things right there, or at least two, the divorce, taxes, you could do that type of planning, whether it's a prenup or whether it's a postnuptial agreement. The taxes, that's all the estate planning side. Lawsuits, that's on the asset protection side. Structure your business, structure your personal life properly. And then you can at least knock out those three. And then you have to just deal with whether the business is any good or it's being mismanaged.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, these are avoidable situations, and getting ahead of it, and we're right back to where we started, right? Do it early, do it often. There's no downside, as you point out, to doing this and taking a look at it.
Hmm. One thing too I want to mention, Dominic, is the aspect of putting some money to the side. It's the asset protection type of component to it. That what if everything goes away? What if a huge catastrophic event occurs and I lose everything? What do I have set up on the side in order to cover me under those circumstances? And in a lot of those situations, we always tell our clients, no matter how good your business is, do you have some sort of structure set up that if you lose everything else, at least you have something to pull from out there? And that's not hiding assets. That's not putting gold in your basement. That's a structure that actually works. It's transparent and it can continue to work without you telling it to work, and taking care of not only you, but your family and anybody else you want to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we're going through right now is a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah.
For the folks who have money aside, who have kept a good amount of working capital in the business, have put money in other places, they'll probably weather this storm. And the folks who
Hmm.
haven't are, going to have some tough times ahead.
Yeah, if you look at right now, I'm hearing more and more in the news and seeing more articles on litigation attorneys are ramping up. They're ramping up. And that's going to be true because there are going to be bankruptcies. There are going to be contract breaches, whether it's real estate or operations. There's going to be tax issues. There's going to be people suing because their employer shouldn't have been asking people to come and work for COVID-19. Who knows? But there's going to be a lot of litigation. And if you're not prepared with some sort of, whether it's a domestic trust or an offshore asset protection trust, or just some things that you can build into your family office, whether in the FLLC side, such as charging order protection and trusts and things of that nature, you're potentially going to be left in a really bad scenario. I remember one scenario that I've run into a couple times over the past few years where a client comes to me and they don't do this type of protection. Everything's going well. Let's say they're helping people start up businesses. Next thing you know, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, comes in, says, hey, we've been receiving some complaints about your business. Maybe you're violating some type of SEC related laws or something. But in any event, the SEC comes in, shuts them down, freezes their accounts, freezes their daughter's accounts, who's at college, in order to investigate this for the next year. And you can see people's lives just get ruined, only for the SEC to come back a year later potentially and say, oh, sorry, wrong guys. We're really looking at these other guys. Carry on. And in the meantime, you couldn't even hire an attorney to represent your interests because all your assets are frozen. You can't keep your house and your mortgage payments. You can't keep your business going. I've seen that a couple times, and it's really scary to see that type of thing, which is why we highly recommend that people take us, at least 10, 15, maybe 20% of their assets, set them aside in some sort of protection type of structure in order to, cover those situations so that you're not moving into your parents' basement someday.
Yeah. Wow. That's a horrible situation. Horrible. So, Eric, this has been tremendous information. I really appreciate all of the information. This has been jam-packed. But if we were to put a bow on this, what high-level thoughts, 2 or 3 thoughts, would you leave with the M&A Unplugged community?
I think GRATs, intentionally defective grantor trust, family limited liability company structures are imperative. The family limited liability structure allows you to not only get it to the next generation, but also to get the discounting necessary. And it keeps the power and the control of those assets with the matriarch and patriarch without including it in their estate. Then the world's becoming more international too, as you know. I would recommend people make sure that they're disclosing any offshore assets. We're seeing a number of those issues come up with regards people don't report it, then the IRS comes in and basically takes a large chunk of those assets. So it's disclosure issues, tax issues, asset protection. But you have to start with that core estate plan so that people understand it. If for no other reason, Domenic, than to take care of yourself individually too. I mean, who's going to make that decision with regard to healthcare decisions if you can't make those decisions, or property? What happens to your business if you pass away? Those types of things. So
right.
It's not just a tax or an income issue. It's who's going to take over and be responsible and even know what to do in the event that something's happened. Because let's face it, none of us are getting out of here alive. And it's that idea that we have to plan for not necessarily the unknown, because we're all going to pass away, but pass for the known. Those things that we can check off our list, whether it's lawsuits, divorces, taxes, and the type of planning that we can put in place to make sure that everything's going where people need it to go.
Yeah, great information. Eric, thank you so much for being here today. And if people in the M&A Unplugged community wanted to get in touch with you, how could they reach you?
Well, www.handlerthayer.com. My last name, Kalnins, is quite uncommon. So just by putting that into a Google search, it comes up to me pretty quickly. But we're very accessible. Email address is on my website as well as my background. And again, thanks, Domenic, for having me here. This is just a great conversation, and it's information that we need to get out to everybody out there.
Absolutely. And I'd love to have you come back again as things unfold here. And, we know more about, what's happening and the picture becomes clearer with post-pandemic, hopefully, new world order.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about the process of acquiring or selling a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com, or feel free to reach out to me at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.